and I was in corporate, and I was in cold calling and selling. And what's interesting is when you're on a sales floor, you can overhear other people's sales calls, and you can hear the managers taking over and doing closes and things like that. And you can see the heads of sales doing their thing too. And it was very interesting seeing that some people would say something down the phone, but then mean something else and say something else when off the phone.
Is leadership about power, or is it about trust? Is success just about hitting targets, or is it about building meaningful connections that last? Richard Moore has the answers. Richard Moore is not just a coach to Fortune 500 executives. He's a game changer. As the founder of LinkedIn Client Accelerator and the Art of Sales community, Richard has transformed how leaders connect, communicate, and build credibility. He champions the idea that true success stems from trust, authenticity, and meaningful relationships, not just hitting targets. Welcome to the Design Rush podcast. I'm your host, Kia Johnson. Today we're exploring how business leaders can build trust that transcends transactions, the secrets to reshaping personal brands into credible, trust-driven platforms, practical steps to transform your leadership style into one that inspires and unites teams. My guest, Richard, is a master of helping leaders transform their personal brands and business ecosystems into trust-driven powerhouses.
If you're an executive, who are the people closest to you, like right around you, like your inner circle, and you do good with them? And what I mean is, you're not trying to cut corners or try and be super efficient with like a message to everyone. You know, if you've got 5 reports, then you treat them all as individuals and you give them time. And yeah, you have a team meeting, but you also see them individually.
In this episode, Richard will challenge you to rethink what leadership means. He'll reveal how identifying blind spots can set you apart as a leader, why trust is the most valuable currency in today's business world, and how building authentic relationships is the ultimate differentiator.
So healthy paranoia, for instance, for these things is important. At least you should be having these questions. Now, the reason why I'm saying this is because it brings the team around the table, literally, when it's not needed. And you might be like, oh, but not efficient and so on. But it's really important to be considering all angles and looking under all the rocks and stones and considering, like, what have we missed?
This episode is packed with actionable insights and transformative advice from one of the most insightful minds in leadership today. Perfect for when you're ready to lead with clarity, strengthen relationships, position your brand as a trusted powerhouse, and drive sustainable success. Got a story worth sharing? Email us at spotlight@designrush.com. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more insights that will transform the way you grow your business. Let's dive in. Hey Richard, it's awesome having you join us today. You know, you've built such a dynamic career from coaching consultants and working with global brands to founding the LinkedIn Client Accelerator and launching the Art of Sales community. So I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. But before we get into the deeper stuff, let's kick things off with a quick round of rapid fire questions. No overthinking. All right.
I promise.
Awesome stuff. Just the first thing that comes to mind. So are you ready for me?
I'm ready, yes.
Fantastic. Okay. First question is, what's worse, over-promising or under-delivering?
Both. And I refuse to choose one. It's my answer.
Awesome. Second question is, the biggest lie executives tell themselves about trust?
I think the biggest lie they tell themselves is that they can buy the trust. They have to really earn it. And it really matters. So I'm sure we'll get into that more in this session.
Oh, yes. All right. And the next one is, what's more damaging, losing client trust or employee loyalty?
That is so hard, Kia, to answer. I think actually it's client trust just edges it. I think it's client trust. Because that's really hard to get back.
Is that your final answer?
You're making me pick between 2 really bad things, so yeah, I'm gonna go with that. I mean, both are obviously awful.
Understood. Okay, so next one is, should executives apologize publicly or privately?
It depends, and I know you're going to hate that answer. It has to depend because it depends on the optics and the necessary politics of it. But in most cases, it really should be done publicly because then they're owning the mistake. They really should be doing it publicly. But in some exceptions, privately can also be done because it needs to be sensitively done.
Hearing you. Okay, my last one is, can trust be earned in a moment?
So it can be earned swiftly. For instance, I had a call with someone I'd never met yesterday, and I gained trust really quickly because we realised we had this connection and there was a lot that we had in common. And it was one of those moments, when it's like, me too. She said, we're basically the same person, and that trust you could feel was within moments there. So it is possible if there's alignment to get that, but typically it requires a number of touch points because there's a natural barrier of self-preservation and protection that one has that needs to be overcome with it. So it rightly needs to be earned typically. So kind of no.
So true. Okay, I reckon you get 5 out of 5. Here's
Thank
your
you very
Design
much.
Rush Award.
I passed.
Okay, so Richard, I'd love for us to now get into the deeper discussion, right? And getting to the crux of everything. You've shaped sales strategies with the LinkedIn Client Accelerator. You've worked with Fortune 500 brands, and you've coached top tier executives as well. I mean, you've consistently emphasized the power of trust and personal credibility. So my question is, when did you actually first realize that executive trust is the defining currency in modern business leadership?
Yeah, thanks. It's a really good question, and it takes me really back to my early 20s, and I was in corporate and I was in cold calling and selling. And what's interesting is when you're on a sales floor, you can overhear other people's sales calls, and you can hear the managers taking over and doing closes and things like that. And you can see the heads of sales doing their thing too. And it was very interesting seeing that some people would say something down the phone, but then mean something else and say something else when they're off the phone. And I recognized that there was often a two-pronged approach, and it was interesting to observe that. And I really believe that integrity matters so much, and it's this hallmark of the people you look up to, because when you work with someone long enough, whoever it might be, you do notice chinks in the armor, and you do notice their flaws and so on, but you definitely notice over time if they're losing, if they haven't got integrity, and if they're missing, the ability to stay aligned with their values and so on. And I really saw that firsthand, and it for some people they're very tolerant of it, but it really gave me the ick. And it was it was an interesting subconscious note I took, and I must have been 24 or so, Kia, but it was a subconscious note that when I became a manager, I just really wanted to make sure that what I believed in and what I said were two things that were the same. And so it's just so interesting observing things when you're party to it, and when you can see how people are internally and how what they say, when they put the phone down to a client, or when they walk out of a meeting having spoken to someone. And it all starts with thinking to yourself, what really matters to me, and what are my values, and what is my goal here? Is it to be true to the kind of person I am, or is it just to play a game in order to get somewhere, despite the fallout and the people I lose along the way?
Now, wouldn't you say, if your intentions are good, as a business executive, and this is exactly what you want to do, that it's a very hard thing to do, because you are in this leadership position. There's a certain role that you have, and obviously with this role comes certain responsibilities, and when you perhaps you value your integrity, but in the same breath you almost have to pull back a bit, if that even makes sense what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So wouldn't you say it's that much harder?
It really is. When you're in position, when I became a team lead and then a head of sales and then a sales director, it's really difficult because compromise needs to be a feature of what you're doing. But as you grow, or as you progress, and as you raise yourself through the ranks, you have to become stronger. And it's so, and I found it hard at the start to stick to my guns, because originally I was a bit of a people pleaser because I didn't want to ruffle feathers. But actually, when you're like, do you know what? Here's what I believe in. You have to stand your ground with it. And there are ways around this, but like sometimes you've got to recognize that it's not the right place for you. And we'll get into this, I'm sure, but it really matters that those around you have similar baseline fundamental values. Otherwise, there will always be that misalignment, and you'll always be having to add treatment to how you interact with them so that you appease their perspectives. And you know, it just sometimes you get to a point where it's like, it's enough signs that I probably should move on or try something else. And I experienced it firsthand, and in a team where it was like there was a lot of shoddy work practice, and it didn't make me happy. And there was a lot of, you know, just say this to them, and like a lot of spin being given to the team, for instance. And I was in these meetings saying like, why are we talking about how we would manipulate people? But I think what you've rightly brought up is that it is difficult, because it's your job if you're not aligned. It's all well and good just to say, well, you've got to be strong and stick to your guns. But when that means you're not aligned, you'll gently be nudged out. And that's how it often is. And sometimes it's a case of saying, well, I stick to my guns. And if that's not good enough, it will mean I might need to move on. And that's hard in the short term, but it's right in the long term, because it's really tough living in a way day in, day out, months and years, when you're just not feeling good about yourself, and everyone else is cool with it because you're playing this game. But it's just so important to maintain integrity and sometimes choose a different track to go on.
I was just going to say, because you're talking more looking at the longevity and the sustainability of that. I mean, if you have that integrity kind of like nailed down and knocked down, it would be difficult at first. But once you are really in that alignment, it becomes an easier process moving forward. And that in essence would then trickle down to the rest of the organization. And you would then find the synergy between yourself and your staff, I'm assuming, right?
It's absolutely true. And one of the things people should be doing early on, if they're listening to this and they're like young or early in the, or even if they haven't done it yet and they're older in the, you know, but like they should be doing some kind of course or understanding like, what kind of person am I? What kind of character am I? Because everyone is different, and that you need to have a sense of like, well, what are the values I hold important to myself? And there's the cliches, but you need to actually study what's you know, and then what kind of matters to you. And when you do that, it doesn't half help you view the world in the right way. But you're right, it does trickle down. So the team I have at the moment is like 6 of us, that's all. So it's really wonderful having this team running the art of sell with them and doing the other bits and pieces in my world. And hiring people that are like, of course they need to be ambitious, and of course hardworking, and of course very, very talented. But more than anything, you have to just clearly just click and get along. The kind of person you would want to spend time with one-on-one, just to hang out with them, because you are aligned on so many levels. That kind of thing matters. And, you know, it means that we're not steering carefully around conversations or saying things in a certain way just to make sure that person's kept happy, whilst also considering someone else's point of view. We can really just be ourselves, and that's the outcome we should really try and map to. And it's about being, and people talk about authenticity in business, but this is really what it looks like. It starts with having an actual sense of who you are, and I genuinely mean it when I say that for many, they've not really mapped out who they actually are. Despite being a grown-up and having lived with themselves for decades, it's something that's not really been examined enough, and I think it needs to be done, because everything stems from there, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. That actually brings me to my next question, because you're touching on a couple of key things right now. And you know, executive credibility, it's often seen as a PR asset, right?
Yes.
But you've actually described it as a business differentiator. So how can C-level executives actually build trust that directly impacts their bottom line?
So this is a really interesting interesting answer I'm going to give you, and it's not what people think. The answer is to go small. And what that means is, if you're an executive, who are the people closest to you, like right around you, like your inner circle, and you do good with them. And what I mean is, you're not trying to cut corners or try and be super efficient with like a message to everyone. You know, if you've got 5 reports, then you treat them all as individuals and you give them time. And yeah, you have a team meeting, but you also see them individually. And and I'm speaking now as someone who's done this with teams over the years, and I do this with my team now. You check in with them and you're asking how they're doing, and you check in because, you know, they're having their new baby, or they're having, you know, they've just moved house, or whatever it might be. And you really focus on going small with the people around you. And it's the people you touch that you do that with. Now, for many, they'll be like, but that's not workable, Richard, because I have many reports, I have lots of people to work with. But the way you do it is important, because then word gets around. And you can't be the distributor of this vibe for yourself with everyone. You need other people to go do it yourself. Much like what I do with, say, with LinkedIn and, you know, with my communities, what I want is for people to feel special. And that's easy to say, but when you actually do it, you start seeing signifiers of success in the form of other people talking about you behind your back, but in a good way. In my case, maybe they do a post, or you see that there's a collaboration. I had someone the other day, it was about 2 days ago, I think, sent me a photo of her, she's a client, and someone else that I'd worked with who hosted an event and invited me to keynote, and they were having coffee together in London. And they chose to take a picture, and they came together because I'd introduced them and we'd done work together, and then they took a picture and then decided to send it to me to say, hey, we're hanging out. And you just think these moments matter. I had one this morning, literally this morning, and that person had been recommended to speak to me by someone else who was also a client. And she was like, you've got to speak to Richard. And so it was so nice to do it. So you've got to start small, because you can put effort and focus in those people around you, and then they will be, I want to use a better word than disciples, but essentially they're out like evangelizing about what you're doing. And so work with individuals, now they will spread the word.
I'm hearing you 100%. It would be so great, you know, if you can actually share a real world example where a leader's personal brand helps secure a major contract or deal. Is there anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, so there was a managing director I worked with once, and this was one of my first deals I did, and he was one of these guys that was like known, has a bit of a reputation for just being an absolute tiger at his job, you know, like really, really pushed himself and always delivered. And it was so interesting because when I joined that company, he said, Richard, I want you to come with me to meet this new managing director that I'm going to be speaking to and pitching. So it was basically him going to pitch someone else. And we went to that company's office, and they had their sales director and they had the managing director. And the managing director said, there's a reason why we've got you here. And this was a recruitment business we were working with. And he said, it's not because we're looking for a recruiter. It's because we want you. And he named the person. I was like, okay, that's a personal brand right there. And I remember that stood out so much. It's like, we're not shopping around. We want it to be you. We know your terms will probably be premium, but we know about your delivery. We'd worked with, you know, JP Morgan and like some really cool quant trading houses in the city and things like that. And they were like, you know, it's almost like you've got the deal. We're just checking you're right. And it was so interesting that the managing director that I went with, who essentially had closed this deal without trying, hadn't said a word. And it was like, it's got to be you. And it was like, that is a reputation that gets around. And this guy didn't have to pitch them. He didn't have to like send them a note or a gift or anything like that. That was reputation really doing a job. What was interesting then was that I had to work on my personal brand and building it too. So the managing director that I went with said, was like very gracious and said, thank you so much. Then he introduced me and he said, this is my new guy, Richard, who's, like a new team leader. And so then they turned to me and listen, this lot, we've brought them in because they are the details guys. Like, they know everything. So if you're going to work with us as well, then we need to make sure that you know your stuff. And I remember their sales director, who was like this pit bull, said to me, like, how do I know you're going to be as good detailed as the rest of them? I mean, we're bringing them in, but we don't really know you. And I remember I'd done my research and I said, well, I am a details guy too. I know, for instance, that you're a really big fan of 2020 cricket. And I remember they looked at each other, they're like, how do you even know that? And I said, because on your LinkedIn headshot, this was like 2020, it was like a long time ago. On your LinkedIn headshot, in the background, there's Lord's Cricket Ground, and I could see the collar was a 2020 cricket shirt, and he was like, we're good here, well done, good stuff. And I was like, it helped to pay attention, but it was so powerful watching the reaction to my managing director as I walked in. It was like he was this celebrity, and I loved that, and it always reminded me to map to them seeing you as the prize. That's really real personal brand, rather than just because they're a customer, you see them as the prize. That's the way to do it.
Oh, I like that. I really like that. Yeah. And the other thing is also being observant, because when we say being observant, I guess we always think, just checking out my surroundings, that kind of thing. But when it comes to business, it's actually going beyond that, It's really seeing past a lot of sort of the surface level observancy. You know what I mean? So
this is where the trust really grows as well, and
Exactly.
True excellence at this in leadership, but also in real building trust, is in the nuance. And when you have a team member or an employee feel seen, not just as an employee that you're listening, that's being listened to, but feeling seen because of something specific, it goes such a long way, and it really is powerful when you notice the small things. It's always been my job though, because I've won deals because I focus on the detail. Otherwise, everyone else is the same if you think about it. So, and if you zoom to like nowadays, I'm currently working on a large course with LinkedIn, so they've commissioned me to do it. And we're going to be shooting in LA next year, and it's specifically called the nuance and finesse of communication in business. It's specifically on how to interact. I've already done 5 courses with them, all on this topic. So for some reason, it's like they really can't get enough of it. But it is that detail. It's like, how are we interacting? What are the words we're using? But also, what are the little things about that individual we picked up on? Prior to recording this, you and I joked about the use of words that my South African friends used with me when they said hello. So it's little nuance like that makes a difference.
Yes. You actually now I'm just realizing you were kind of like sussing me up there then.
Well, in many ways. The problem is whenever I talk about this stuff, everyone then looks back and go, was it all a play?
Yes.
It's like, no, I just genuinely was being nice, but it can look really contrived.
I'm seriously teasing you. No,
I know you are.
I could see it came from a very genuine place.
Yes.
I think also when one is in this kind of space, you need to very quickly be able to read someone.
Absolutely. Right.
So it's part and parcel, and I think you and I are kind of in similar spaces when it comes to that. Speaking about being like the details guy, right? And I'm wondering if this kind of lends into the next question that I have, which is around executives actually measuring trust building efforts in tangible business metrics, things like revenue, your customer retention, or your market share. I mean, details would then be very important in that as well, right?
It's a really hard thing to measure because it's about feel. But what you can do is dare to ask your customers and your market what they think of you. And it's always really hard, and it's tough on the ego to go beyond closing the deal or even renewing the deal as your metric for success. I've worked with a company in the past where if you close deals, you were successful. And it's like, yeah, but then they leave. So like, it's not necessarily successful. When you dare to actually go and ask them, you know, what's been, not like, did you get the metrics you paid for, but what's been your experience? What you're doing then is you're giving them, if you do it in the right way, a safe space to share how it's gone and what they might improve. And it's actually there, in my opinion, where you can really see if you're getting that kind of true trust, and if they're seeing you with a sense of integrity. Otherwise, it's conjecture and it's bias, and it's all coming from like, well, I feel like it's okay, so therefore it must be all right. And I just think many businesses don't dare do that because they don't want to hear that maybe they are infallible, they're fallible or could be improved, you know. And that same goes for with employees. You know, with my Art of Sell group, if someone was to leave, we'd ask them to give feedback on the experience. And it's so tempting to go, they've left, they're dead to us, leave them. Like, we don't need to know. But like, actually you get better when you dare to be humble about it. Ego is a really annoying little thing that gets in the way of truth. And I think that really matters.
So true. You know, many executives actually confuse authority with credibility. So I'd love to find out from your experience, what's the biggest mistake that leaders can make when trying to assert authority?
Yeah, I think the biggest mistake is thinking it needs to be represented in a particular persona. So this happened to me at the start. So and there's nothing wrong with him, but the manager that I had before I became a manager was a very alpha, hot-headed Italian. Imagine if I say Italian alpha sales manager, all the things you can imagine. He was the stereotype. He's a wonderful, warm-hearted guy, but he had that kind of attack about him on everything. And I assumed, because I'd kind of been raised, so to speak, by him, I assumed that was how I should be as a manager. And it failed massively, because that's not true to who I am. I'm a different kind of person. And so the answer to your question is thinking that authority or leadership comes from presenting as the big boss, you know, like a little bit of swagger, or a little bit too alpha, or being overbearing is a big one, or always being the one having the last word, or being the one who always makes the final decision. Of course the buck stops with you, but you find that you get so much more from those around you, and that you're leading and influencing by letting them in a bit. So every week, for instance, on a Thursday morning, I sit with the team and we talk about things, and it's been spectacular seeing what happens when you give someone a real ownership of their space, and you make them feel like they've got a safety net, because it is all on you. But at the same time, it's like, what do you want to do then? And you help and you guide and you nudge, and you can see a bit higher perhaps than them. But when you say, so what do you think we should do? Like, what would you like to do? And then let them go do it. As long as you know that you're not letting them massively fail and embarrass themselves. You're just kind of guiding and being Socratic with your questioning and so on. It's just amazing. You can really, this isn't about being lazy. This is about letting them lead when they need to. And I think what it represents is when you're secure in yourself. You know, the insecure cannot do this. Those that are at the cusp of narcissist cannot do this, because they have to always be the dominant one. But when you recognize that it's about the outcome for the team and you're all winning, and it sounds cliche, but like when you take it with that approach, you do find you get so much more from people. And that's not just where loyalty starts. Sorry, the trust starts, but it's where loyalty comes as well. And that's why, you know, one of the things I say to one of my team members in particular the most is, like, put it down, like, go to bed kind of thing. Like, she can't get enough of it. And that's a really wonderful example of someone who's really bought in. But they're bought in because you're giving them ownership of their space. It's like, I've hired you to be great. And actually, it's a mistake that a lot of leaders have, is that they think that leadership is this, like, Braveheart style speeches every morning, and like, absolutely being the tip of the spear for everything. But in fact, you can be behind everyone and putting them in the limelight, and it gets so much more from them, I find. So, but that's a process of often learning we have to go through to be able to get that right.
Say, for example, I'm a leader and I'm doing my thing and I've got a really powerful title. So, I think I've got it going. What would you say are the early indicators to actually show that an executive is losing trust in the market despite actually having a powerful title?
Yeah, it's actually what the market's saying, or if they're not speaking at all. So if we're speaking about an audience or clients, the question we've got to ask ourselves is, am I coming up much? Am I in conversation? Am I a point of discussion? Because and actually, what we need to do is have our allies who can find this kind of stuff out, because often the person who needs to know it the most hears it last. I worked as a consultant for a company once where I knew the CEO really well. They weren't huge; they're like 40 million turnover, and there was like a decent number of people there, like a couple of, I think it was like well over 100 people there. And I remember him saying, like, "You're here to train people," but he was fairly new as a CEO at that company, and he said, "I need eyes on the ground. I need an ally who can, they're not going to tell me the truth. They're gonna go, you're the CEO, so I will tell you this truth, or they won't say anything at all." And he's like, "If you can give me feedback, good, bad, and ugly, that would really help a lot." And it was really powerful for him to have someone like me, and there was a bunch of others as well. Like, we weren't like doing stuff behind people's back, but what we were able to do was go to him and say, "Here's the feeling, here's the sentiment. Now that you've done this thing, or now that you've done that thing, you've rolled out a new initiative, or you've made a statement, or you've put out a press release." And we were his, eyes on the ground. But then you can do the same with the market by having allies out there. There was someone, just a quick example of this. It was a while back, and I'm a good guy, so I like to align myself with lots of different people and just generally be a good part of the community and so on. But there was someone who I thought very highly of, and I worked with her, and she was a customer of mine, and she messaged me one day and said, "Richard, me and this other person have been talking, and we look out for you, and we want you to be okay. And I wanted to let you know that the optics of you interacting with these people here is having, for some of us, this kind of an effect." And she said, "It's not like we're all upset, but this is the beginnings of that's interesting." And she said, "I know you're not doing it for these reasons, but it's something just to consider." Now, I wouldn't have known that at all. And I was like, "Thank you so much." And she was like, "I can't believe that you're taking this the right way and not getting upset." I'm like, why would I? She wasn't saying don't be friends with people. She was just saying, just consider all angles. And I pride myself on being good at that stuff, but sometimes it's just, you don't get it always right. And it's so powerful to have allies on the ground. So fixing these kind of problems starts way back, years back, by being a good person, having great integrity, and working small with people who are going to be trustworthy. And it might be that it's a customer, and someone that isn't in your company, but they can still tell here's the sentiment in the market about what you're doing. And it pays to network, but to network in a transparent way. It is a very, very long play doing this, but it's an incredibly powerful thing to do, because those allies can keep you feeling good, but they will also keep you in check. And I think if we're truly humble about our position and the fact that we are fallible, which we all are, we listen to people. And the only thing in the way of that is one's ego. And the people listening will know if they've got an ego they need to work on, if it speaks to them too loudly, or if actually they're willing to embrace this kind of thing. It's a really important thing to invest in.
Yeah, important to invest in the embracing, and then also it's I guess being mindful, of spaces, and in essence, as you've mentioned now, taking in criticism which is constructive and not meant to harm you in any way, but actually in essence to help you. understand the
and
dynamics of what's
you're
going
right,
on. Yeah.
but also the thing is, criticism from the right people is
And from the
never
right
going to be.
place.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, exactly. It comes from the right place. And so, for instance, when I'm coaching people, they're paying me, but like they love it, it seems, when I'm really brutal with them. But they all know it comes from a place of love. I just want them to win. And I think that's one of the USPs. It's like I will tell them so straight and they hate it. But I'm like, but you need to hear it, you know? And I just think there's too much. It's not healthy to be agreeable all the time, just to pay lip service and people please. It's very unhealthy. It's a slow poison, and it's not helping. If you have something you could share, often the reason why we don't share that information is because we're concerned about how it might land. And that might be partly the ego of the person we need to tell it to, but also it's partly down to how we deliver that. And so it's on us to like work on how we say things as well. It's important.
Very true. Richard, I just want us to move a little bit to looking at transactional deals and trust-based partnerships, right?
Yeah.
Because many businesses like still focus on transactional deals, like instead of those trust-based partnerships. So how can agencies and C-level leaders like reframe their sales strategies to focus on relationship-driven business ecosystems? I mean, we've touched on a couple of things, but I think we can really unpack it here.
This is a great question, and I love it. So I'm qualified to answer this. The first decade of my life, of my career even, was selling in a cold call. When the deal's done, that's the end of it for me kind of approach. It was very transactional. I didn't even account management. It went to someone else. The second 10 years since like starting my own business in 2014 has been much more trust-led, and that's been really the focus. And the difference is, you're asking in the sales strategy or the sales process, the difference is when you're interacting with that prospect and talking about their issues and consulting and understanding the problem, then presenting a solution, you are also aware of the state of the buyer. The state of the buyer at the point of buying something is often thinking about what they're going to get after the deal. There's usually a misalignment here, and the person selling is usually focused on the deal, and the person buying is interested in the bit after. When you buy an iPhone, you can bet a lot of money that the person selling you the iPhone in that phone shop really wants their commission and couldn't care less what you do with your phone. Now, when you're the one buying it, you care about when you get home, what you're going to do with it, all the stuff you're like, yeah, I have to go through this slight pain speed bump of like paying you or whatever, but like I can't wait to do this thing. So when we realign to part of the sales process, including the bits that come after, we are in a whole different world. So 2 sales I've done in the last 2 days, okay, and both of them deployed this technique. So what I was doing with them was not just focusing on what we'll do when we work together, but I was also focused on like literally fresh out of the box what we'll be doing right away. And it's almost like the deal is incidental. The focus is on like tomorrow you'll get this thing. On January, let's schedule a date where we do this thing, and really living the excitement with them for the next stages. They're really excited about the transformation, sure, but also like, oh, so you're going to do this with me? Yeah, in the first session it'll be great. We're going to do these things together. And if you actually have a service or a product that you're into, you will want to do this. Because, and I said, this is what I said to the sale earlier today. I was like, this is about mutual accountability and responsibility for your transformation. Like I genuinely, you can tell by my energy, I love doing it and I love helping. And so when we do that, they're on my side. This salesperson actually wants to get these results too, as opposed to, yeah, like when can you get the sale back? Like when can you get the contract back? Do you think you could do that today? Like work with the reality that they are more interested in what's happening, the steps afterwards. Like talk about that, help them visualize it, all this kind of thing. And I learned this when I went for a shirt. I went to have a shirt fitted once, and it was so amazing. The guy was talking about how it sits and how it works with the suit and things like that. And we were talking about like what it looks like when you put it on. And I was just like, this experience is so much better than what size do you need, sir? And assuming I'm just the expert, he wanted to be part of my experience with me and help me share that. And it just was a wonderful learning point, I remember.
Now, Richard, there's sort of like a general consensus when one looks at the working environment where things get, very comfortable, and you're sort of in the space of like everything is going great, and as a leader, everyone's sort of, yeah, how's it, man? Patting you on the back, it's looking good. But leaders often are judged quite harshly during times of crisis situations. Now, how can executives build a trust reserve to rely on when unexpected challenges actually hit?
Yeah, so what you need when you have crisis is everyone on board wanting to like throw themselves at the problem and work. And it's what you do in peacetime that helps you fight these wars. There's an amazing guy. When I started my business, so it was probably about a year or so in, I started reaching out to like top people to ask them for advice, just because why not? And hey, we have LinkedIn. And there was a guy I'll never forget called Robin Terrell. He used to be the UK managing director of Amazon. So that was in the end of the 90s, like when it was really rocketing. He was in charge of all of Amazon UK. And Robin said, Richard, a really good bit of advice for leaders is, if it ain't broke, you're not looking hard enough. And so it's a really powerful reframe on if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And it works so well in this scenario, because what you should be doing when it's all going well is still having your war room with your team coming in and saying to them, where are the problems right now? And if they're like, well, there aren't any problems, your answer should be, if there were problems though, what would they be? And so I really find it's very, very, I'm in the 1% of the 1% now, because I've run a business for more than 10 years. In the UK, like that's the statistic. And so in order to run a business this amount of time, you have to have what's known as healthy paranoia. And it's not like leaving yourself open to like losing sleep all night, but I've got 2 kids, but I have also got a 3rd kid, which is my business. And I think just considering, honestly, it's like, but luckily 2 of my children don't need their nappies changed anymore, but sometimes my own business does. Yay. But what's crucial, what's crucial though, is you're saying to yourself, where could the problem come up? The problem, the question one might be asking oneself right now, and should have a team around them when they ask, is, what about AI? Look at how how much of a transformation AI has had in literally 12 months in 2024. This podcast, I assume, will air in 2025. By this time next year, it will be unrecognizable. The change is incredible, and it's not just iterative, it's exponential. So how is that affecting you? And so healthy paranoia, for instance, for these things is important. At least you should be having these questions. Now, the reason why I'm saying this is because it brings the team around the table, literally, when it's not needed. And you might be like, oh, but not efficient and so on. But it's really important to be considering all angles and looking under all the rocks and stones and considering what have we missed. And that's why it's healthy as well to get externals come in as well. And in fact, one of the jobs I had once was I was in a company. I went in 1 day a week, and my job was to show them their blind spots. And it was like, I remember they were like, we think we're doing really well. I'm like, you're not. This guy here, his pipeline's a problem. This guy here actually isn't delivering. Here are all these blind spots. And I think it's so important to get external eyes as well. But get your team around the table, because then they are naturalizing to not looking at it all as hunky-dory. Just because you're hitting your milestones and objectives and the bottom line is good and the operating costs are sweet and your fixed costs are low, doesn't mean it's all going to be fine. You are guaranteed curveballs. Guaranteed. There will be issues. No one foresaw the pandemic, for instance. So what things are you considering? And it just means they're used to it. And ideally, when something comes up, You can say to the team, hey, we prepared for this. But worst case, you can say to the team, now we're talking about these blind spots. We're all in this together. We've been doing this together. How do we continue as a team to handle this kind of problem? And I do feel that the more one does this kind of exercise and get people around the table and basically spitball and, have thought experiments on what one might do if certain things happen, the more they are essentially being trained for the tough stuff. This is kind of training of sorts. So I just think that kind of, and that, you can get coaches that help with like crises and things like that. But I think at the very least, get people around the table and work on the assumption that there's going to be a problem. And right now there are also problems that you're maybe unaware of, and get people cross-pollinating. You know what? I've observed, we had this really great sales manager who was like, I want your department to talk about your department. I want your department.
Oh,
and
nice.
it was brilliant. He had
That must have, yeah.
it was brilliant. All the functions together. And you had, marketing and sales snarling at each other. But he said, the thing is, you need to get this off your chest. You need to understand what's going on, because you never sit together. You're all separate functions. And it was so powerful, because it was like, we feel that it wasn't accusatory. It was, we feel that maybe you're missing something here. Is this something you've considered? And you've got to remember that you may be different departments within a business, but the same business, but it doesn't mean that you all think the same way. You often have a completely different angle of attack, and that can be really useful.
So then in essence, the departments are actually identifying the blind spots by doing that. I think that's a fantastic idea, hey? It really is one that you should implement in your organization, especially I think when it comes to larger organizations, when you have more happening than less, that's when you can't put your sort of hand in the honey jar, in every single honey jar. You kind of got to be, okay, how can we consolidate this? And by having the departments talk to each other, it alleviates pressure from you as an exec as well, and also assists in the departments themselves thinking, oh, let me just take a look at what I'm doing here. How can I improve? Because I don't like what they're saying.
Exactly.
And it's motivation.
Exactly, but it's hard to start with, because everyone's got to get over themselves, and everyone's like, oh, I don't like hearing this. So like a really good example, in my community, I actually do this. So once a month rather, we have a live pitch session, and it's like with a bunch of business leaders, and people put their hand up scared, but there's good idea, or we spin a wheel and your name comes up, and it's like, you got 2 minutes, tell us the scenario, and I'll pitch as though you're pitching, like go for it. And it's horribly difficult, but it's like you're going to get a critique now. And it's so interesting, because everyone's been pitched before and everyone has their interesting angle. And just because I've worked in sales a long time and I know my stuff, it doesn't mean that I know everything, because I'm receiving it the way I would receive it. But now we can see the way other people would. And it's just a great way to do it. So always ask yourself, like, if I could get people around the table, can I get them, or why don't I ask them to troubleshoot or even rip to shreds ideas? And a lot of good companies do this. I'm trying to think of one. I think it's BlackRock that does this. So whenever they have an investment idea, they'll get around the table and it's like, our job is to rip it to shreds and poke holes in it and find all the issues with it. Because if we can't do it, or if we do it, then it means it saves us doing it in the market. And I just think it's just healthy. But again, the reason why people don't do it, oh, I'm a bit busy, or oh, my ego. And if you can get over that, it's good and healthy to do in the medium and long term.
Definitely. I want to move our focus a little bit to AI, because you were chatting about it quite extensively, and saying that there's going to be a lot of changes happening in the year 2025. And I assume,
it might be turned off, but I assume there will be.
Well, there is that. We have to be realistic in terms of which way it could go. But if it were to go from strength to strength, there is going to be so much more. Well, at least I reckon that we're going to be seeing in 2025. So as these sort of AI-powered communications are now becoming mainstream, how can leaders maintain trust in this increasingly automated world where personal interaction is reduced? There probably is a fine balance, but it's difficult to attain, I would think, especially because we're all trying to evolve with the changes and making sure that we are remaining within the markets in a sustainable manner.
Yeah, there's a lot of answers to this, but one thing you've said in there is like, how can they make sure there's that interaction is done in the right way? And I think some thif AI shouldn't be touching. And so, for instance, if you a really good example of the into the public, if you look at AI comments on LinkedIn, it's like, what are you doing? You're clearly broadcasting you don't care, no trust at all. Like you're not interested. So I will now see you in a particular light. AI comments is a terrible idea. It's a terrible idea if you are trying to be an authentic, present member of a community or conversation. Likewise, it's the same internally. You've got to remember that it's efficient to produce something templated. That's not necessarily AI, but it's something automated and send it to everyone, sure. But for some things, you need to recognize efficiency isn't the goal, it's effectiveness in communication. And we need to speak to people one-on-one. And, imagine an AI appraisal. What an efficient way to get through everything. But imagine if that AI appraisal receives a lot of information from 300 employees, it could crunch it all together and then work out what needs to be worked on. Brilliant for leadership, very efficient. But is it effective? It is if our goal is just to glean some understanding on how we can improve globally from our business employees. But it's very ineffective if it's part of the appraisal objectives to make them feel heard and seen truly by a human. And I think we're not at a place culturally, and we won't be for a few years yet, where we are naturalized to full trust of AI for our best interests. And so there needs to still be that human contact. And ultimately, you've got to look at it behaviorally. We are animals before we are thinking employees. We are animals first, which means we need to have that human interaction. I just think there's some things we have to be really careful with, and but having said that, it's worth noting that businesses should be embracing AI in, at the very least, the sense of why don't we get training on how our employees in their different roles and functions might use AI to improve their output? Not just for us, but to help them have a less stressful time. If someone is slammed and on the cusp of burnout this quarter because they are smashing and they're not saying anything to their manager and they're just working hard, imagine if there were AI tools that would help them be more effective in organizing meetings or crunch through some data quicker. These kind of tools help a lot. But I think it's really difficult because the ultimate issue with the employees is often a fear-based one of, am I losing my job? Klarna in Sweden is the perfect example right now. They haven't made, I think the number is 200 hires they didn't make because AI is doing those jobs no problem. So ideation, content, and so on, it's we're getting AI to do it, so we don't need to be doing that. So if you need to make a statement, in my opinion, of intent along the lines of, we don't know what it looks like, no one does. However, here's what we're going to try and do. We will win. You can never say we guarantee everyone's jobs unless that's what you're going to actually do. So integrity here matters because you will always be remembered for what you say. But what you can say is, what we will do is invest in your training and use of AI so that your job is a better one and a better experience and you have greater tools. I just think it's really important to embrace it and look at how you can use it. Because that potentially is a decision that means you either get left behind or not. Because in a year from now, if you didn't, and there's dinosaurs in every revolution, and I remember in early 2000s pitching internet marketing, and you get the progressives going, I'm all over it, let's do it. And then you get other people saying, no, I'm going to spend £10,000 in a advert in a print publication. I'm just like, why? But they're like, we're sticking to the old stuff. So you've got to remember that it's not going to go away. It's not really a fad, is it? But it is something that your company probably wants you to make some kind of a statement on. But beyond that, it's really hard because everyone's going to be a different case.
Well, I think also if one were to take the stance of, making it very clear that AI, in essence, utilizing it as a support, mechanism or tool to, like you said, enhance your productivity and also to help you in a personal sense not to burn out as my employee. Yes. I think if you were to take that type of stance, that those who are naturally very fearful of it, especially, someone who's maybe, whether it be somebody young or old or whoever, who doesn't like change, this would be actually a nice way to implement it. And like you said, giving them the training on that, absolutely superb. I agree with that 100%. Assist them, guide them, show them that this is going to enhance what you're already doing and actually cut down on your workload, which is fantastic. Absolutely.
Well, it's a very accessible way to dip the toe in the water and say, do you know what? I'm not using AI at all, except that it schedules my meetings for me, or that it organized my workload. And we use AI in the art of sell to do the transcripts and the timestamps. And it was only 2 years ago you'd pay someone to do all that stuff, and it's like just saves a lot of time, and that means that like my head of community isn't doing that stuff, and it's being outsourced. So it's just so powerful to have the right message, which is we're here to make sure that that you're clear we recognize you're human beings with needs, but also we don't want you to be stressed. We want you to enjoy your job here. So we're investing in this as an accessible tool to help you as much or as little as it needs to be. But you need to work with the reticent employees as much as those who are really gung-ho for it, because everyone's response will be different.
Definitely. So Richard, when businesses are looking to select a marketing agency partner, what trust-based factors should they prioritize to ensure a strong, lasting partnership? What would you say to that?
It's going to be really hard to not sound cliche, but I'm doing it. It really matters that your values are aligned, and it's so critical that you interact with that company or individual at the agency, and you're like, do they get me? Do I feel, and your gut matters here, like, do I feel like this is transactional, a bit like we talked about earlier, or is this agency actually into me? Like, do they operate mostly with businesses like mine or in my industry, or is it like they're a behemoth? Not there's nothing wrong with a large company, but are they just looking for another account? Like, do I get the feeling that they're interested? I remember working once with as a big petrochemicals company like 15 years ago, and I took them to lunch and I bought them drinks and we gave them gifts at Christmas. But that's not necessarily good enough, because anyone can do that. Instead, it was when we were having lunch, it was the conversations we had. And it was like, oh, I'm the same. And oh, yeah, my kids do this, she said. And I was like, oh, I used to be like that. And, you're bonding over things. And it has to start there, because when someone sees you as similar, they don't tend to play games quite as much. And I think that there's that saying, people buy from people, but it's actually people buy from people that they like. And it starts with values, like, are you similar? Do you have the same kind of soul? Is one of you super, super alpha and go-getter, and the other one of you just isn't like that? Now, you might argue that I want that kind of person, but you're going to struggle to see eye to eye and get along in those meetings when things are hard and so on. So it works for me so well that whenever I've hired someone, and my team is almost all outsourced, as in they're not on my payroll, and those people are ones where we all get along first and foremost. It's a given they need to be talented, it's a given they need to be good, but then there's plenty of choice if you're looking for talented and good. What we're really looking for is that alignment of values. But again, it starts with the same thing. What are my values then? What matters to me? And you can't pick based on just data. You've got to pick based on how much do you like that person. My community manager is incredible. My web guy is incredible. My newsletter writer is incredible. They're not necessarily the most experienced, but they're incredible because they want to do the thing. There's so much trust and interaction and loyalty, and so they're giving their best. And what that means is they're probably outperforming those who might have superior technique, because the ones with superior technique may not care as much. And what you're looking for is someone for whom this is not just a job. It's someone for whom this is I can't get enough of this. I love the thought that I can work with you. And that's not rare, but it just takes time and exposure to get to know the person enough.
Mm-hmm. I think you've hit the nail on the head there, definitely. So my final question to you is, if you could offer one game-changing mindset shift for executives to adopt heading into 2025, what would it be, and why would you say it matters now more than ever?
I'm going to go back to an previous answer and rework it into this, and it's going small. I'm going to bookend this session with that. It's bothering to recognize that business is a human sport. No matter how many people there are, it's a human sport. So it pays first and foremost to affect the people in your inner circle around you. So you who are the nearest people to me? Do I actually deploy my time, this valuable thing, do I spend my time with them? Am I giving them my time? Because that will then propagate through them to their people. It will mean you hire people like that as well. Especially now, this is to your question, because there's always this kind of drive towards efficiency and saving time, cutting corners, doing a mass automation of things. But when we start looking at people as numbers rather than thinking, feeling beings, we start losing sight of the real game here, which is being shown all the time. If you look at the content creation world, for instance, and business through LinkedIn via content, it's fascinating seeing what's happening. We go more and more into data, and what happens is then you have this kind of mini revolt, and people are like, I'm just bored of this being spoken to in this way. I want it to feel more human again. And we see it everywhere. From supermarkets, look how efficient it is. I can go to the supermarket and buy all my food, and we've shown this less and less human-led, less and less soul to it. And eventually we pop out the other side and you're like, do you know what? I'm going to spend more and go to the independent round the corner because I prefer having that interaction. And it happens over and over again. And there's nothing wrong with technology, but it has to be woven in. And progress has to be woven into the truth that it's human first, as opposed to sideline the human, nostalgic, touchy-feely part of us and treat us like robots. It can work on in the numbers, but eventually the humans revolt back, and then you need to take a step back and recognize you need to be human again. So hopefully I articulated that well enough, but that really matters.
Richard, wow, I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I thank you for your time, your expertise, and for sharing all of these valuable insights with us. I think one of the things that I'm definitely going to remember is, and I hope I'm getting this right, if it ain't broke, what are you doing? Am I right?
If it ain't broke, you're not looking hard enough.
Oh, you're not looking hard.
That's it.
Let's get it. You're not looking?
If it ain't broke, you're not looking hard enough.
You're not looking hard enough. That's it.
Yeah, it's the assumption that there is a problem. You just got to go find it, and it's not pessimistic. It's a really healthy way to think.
Mm-hmm. If it ain't broke, you're not looking hard enough. I will not forget that. I will be dreaming about that as well. And I definitely know that for our Design Rush audience that's watching right now, this is something that's going to stick. Definitely going to stick. Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. Thank you. I really enjoyed it. I appreciate it.
Curious about what top brands look for when choosing an agency? Tune into our latest episodes where we reveal the decision-making secrets of leading brands. Subscribe to the Design Rush podcast and stay ahead of the competition.